This is sort of a comment to or an appreciation of the word designification. So we have someone here saying that they really appreciate that term and they thank you for introducing them. They also ask, what can we do to get the Israeli embassy shut down in Canada? So maybe, Bana, this is clearly for you.
Wow, this is a huge a question. I don't think it was like shut down just because of like one act. I think it was kind of the movement moving without any interruption. Like we had more than 50,000 people every Saturday nonstop marching. We had, boycotts. We had these different groups in, student and staff groups in university academics. They're doing their own action. Every group was doing their own actions. Every company, every place in Ireland, every community, they had action towards Palestine, in solidarity. It was almost, you saw Palestine more than you saw, anything Irish in Ireland. It was like that. It was, it was just, you have to see that happen in Canada where, the Zionist, voices just feel like they cannot win. They cannot win the communities. They cannot win anywhere really, in companies, in food markets, everywhere. They have to be, they have to just feel like they just no longer own the space, and it starts from there, and then it's from that a point onwards. The embassy would just, it's not about the embassy also just feeling like, this is about like the diplomatic situation. I think it's also like, what type of pressure are you putting on the government as well? So the government feels like they can just, any question is, a Palestine question. If they want to do something, well, why are you doing this? Why are you supporting the genocide of Palestinians? Why are you doing this? So you just want to hold them accountable at every venue, to the point that, like, they can no longer avoid the discussion. I think that's what it is. They can no longer avoid it. They just were not welcome. They were just not welcome. I think that's just how they're supposed to feel in Canada. Unfortunately, Canada is a difficult situation because, there are a lot of these, Zionist lobby groups and groupings. In Ireland, I think it's impossible because in society, people kind of just grew to like sort of support Palestinians. They see parallels between their history and Palestinian history. So, in a way, I think the struggle is a bit more kind of has to be a deeper kind of engagement with the Canadian communities. And I think it needs to be kind of, in a way, more focused on getting not just, the bigger level, groupings, but just the smaller community type of things. In every community, there needs to be a discussion or something, a grouping on Palestine. It takes time, but it's important to not see it as impossible. There's no such thing as impossible. People can agitate, and the government can also, like, it's not predictable all the time. People like to believe it is, but it's not. So do work towards that, and you'll see results. If you work towards that, you'll see results. Whether it's with the embassy, whether it's with something even bigger than that. So yeah.
Thank you. Karen and then Bram.
Really briefly, just when the question's asked, I think back to 2020 and the United Nations Security Council seat that Canada had a bid with, and the campaign that we put together with a real focus on Palestine, but really on the broader foreign affairs agendas and Canada's dismal history around foreign affairs. And I mean, that was we were criticized by many groups, including some Palestinian diaspora groups and others such as faith communities and such, saying you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't condemn Canada even in that way. But I mean, I think that was really an example of being able to mobilize. In the end, they were all those groups were celebrating the victory, and I mean, it made it easier that it was Ireland and Norway that were bidding against Canada. But we do have another option coming up on that, because Canada has been positioning, of course, as we go into an election, what will that look like? But they have been positioning for the Human Rights Council seat as well next year. So that would be another campaign. I think that that was quite a bit of an embarrassment, and I think was an important move, and was important also to reach out to member states right across the world to hear we as Canadians saying we're concerned about our foreign policy, be it related to Israel or be it related to mining or other things. So there's another strategy to consider.
Bram?
No, thanks. I think again it's the complication of our contexts that really matter. In South Africa, we found that we had a majority in support of liberation that understood or was able to understand when engaged around the issue and when information was shared around the importance of standing with Palestine. And we had a governing party and the dominant political forces that subscribed to an understanding of liberation history, but also the role of solidarity in our struggle in South Africa. But that was not without its challenges, because we had an economy that was incredibly unreformed. And we had unfortunately, and it's an ongoing problem we face, by the way, is the fact that some of the biggest Jewish voices and biggest Jewish organizations are very openly in support of Israel, even with this genocide. And they often claim to be victim of anti-Semitism, but it is they who endlessly articulate the Israeli situation as a religious question. They, as religious leaders and organizations and representatives, come out over and over and over again saying that the hostages must be free and Hamas is terrorist and the Palestinians and so on. So it creates this problem. So I guess what I'm saying is that the Jewish community in South Africa has some progressive voices, but it still remained quite largely in support of apartheid during the struggle here and also in support of Israel. Which brings me to the next point, that when you do your strategy and tactics and you look at the levers of power, we took over political power in South Africa, but we didn't really take over economic power so significantly. And the Jewish Board of Deputies, a very Zionist outfit in South Africa, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, have a publication called the Jewish Report that I think decided it's a bad idea to expose themselves. But in 2009, they did. Up until 2009, they used to boast about the number of billionaires they had. And at that point, of the 250 richest South Africans, 50 or so were Jewish. And that's from a population of less than 1% of the population. So they had about 20% of the billionaires and millionaires of South Africa, and yet they represented less than 1% of the population. So the economic power of a country that has a minority, although in South Africa we have the 11th biggest Jewish population in the world, by the way, which brings another complication. So even though we've achieved sending the Israeli ambassador back to Israel, even though we've achieved bringing our ambassador back to South Africa and there's been progress on the diplomatic severing of relations, Israel hasn't shut down their embassy in South Africa. But Israel shut down the embassy in Ireland. And then you have to look at the economics of it, and you need to look at the size of that population and how relevant it is to them. And South Africa, of course, is also a little bit of a Washington to the continent of Africa. So South Africa is a bit of a base to the whole continent. So each place has its own complexities, but fundamental is the fact that until there's political reform in some countries, it's almost impossible to see a situation where a government, let's say, of the UK or America or Canada is likely to successfully deliver on downgrading diplomatic relations. It's a political question, and the power of governments in sanctions and isolation is actually massive. Those of us who know about the Venezuelan situation, the embargoes on Cuba, the impact of sanctions on Iran, the effect on Russia's economy from the global isolation of those countries by governments, not by masses of protesters and people from the ground, but governments at the signing of a document are able to cripple other economies. So our role as civil society has to also be to influence those that claim to represent us. And the power comes from the people, but ultimately the victory will only come when the political leaders represent those people, which unfortunately I think isn't the case in some of the countries. So the contexts are different. I think it will be very difficult, but it'd be wonderful if the Canadians could get their government to downgrade relations, but it's not going to be easy. Ireland has a wonderful history grounded in solidarity and liberation. They understand the situation, I think, much better than the people in some of the other countries. But not only that, the governments are less captured, I would say. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We are pushing 2 hours, so I think